Ta-da! Yeah! There they are. Oh, they're so pretty! Alright, this is our full pallet of new lithium batteries, and before we put them into the boat, it's important to unpack them. I'm going to check to make sure all the voltages are correct, because unlike lead acid, they don't sort of self-level once they're connected. So it's important to make sure they're all within like 1/10 of a volt before wiring them all together. Alright, well, last one. The first 11 were exactly the same voltage. Hopefully it's the same too. And it usually drops 13.4, but yep, 13.34. So they're all exactly the same voltage, and they're all fully charged, which is really good, which means we can go ahead and install them straight away. All right, we're back in the cockpit locker again for the, how many times have I rebuilt this? I think it's the 4th time I've rebuilt this space underneath the cockpit sole. But this time it's to install our new lithium, so hopefully it's the last time I have to rebuild this space. There is enough space to put all 12 batteries in here. It's just going to require a little bit of modification. That smells so bad.
What does that smell, man?
That's like 2 months of sitting in the drain pipe water.
Oh.
Yeah. Yeah, that's rough. Oh God. It's just
oh my gosh, yeah.
that's just drain water and ocean. Oh, gross! It got on me. All right, we are down underneath the cockpit sole. It's where our old diesel tank used to be, and it's where we're going to be installing our new lithium-ion batteries. I built these boxes out of some marine ply and then epoxied them and then primed them with the same primer we used for the deck. It's really hard, really durable stuff. There's one more up on deck, but that one goes in last because I'm going to have to like slide the box out and kind of stack the batteries in as we go and then slide it back and then do it to the next one. It's a very tight working space down here. But I think we're about ready to install them. There's 3 boxes. These ones have a higher like outer rim, and then it's lower in the middle for where the cables and stuff are going to go in between to connect all the batteries together. And then I'll probably build some sort of lid that goes on top to keep the dust and grime out. Yeah, we're ready to get them out of the shop and put them in the boat. I'm pretty excited. Cockpit lockers are totally empty because everything's in the cockpit. These things I think weigh just under 30 pounds. All right, last battery going in. So yeah, they're in. They're here. They're pretty. All that's left to do is add the piece of wood that's going to hold down the batteries, act sort of like a strap to keep them in, and wire them. All right, all the old cabling is out. Whew, that was a rat's nest. You guys might wonder why we're ripping out all of the work we did only 2 years ago. But you have to remember that most of this cabling, most of this wiring came from boats that were being scrapped or demolished. So a lot of it's not marine grade wiring to begin with, and a lot of it we have no idea the overall condition and quality that it's in. So since we're upgrading to a new lithium battery bank, and we're doing a lot of other major electrical upgrades, we're also going to be upgrading a significant amount of the wiring as well, at least the main cables, the battery cables, short charger cables, all that kind of stuff. We still have some original wiring on our boat, running lights and some 12-volt outlets and stuff like that, but for the most part, a decent amount of it's going to be new. Well, now that everything's out, it's time to start making some new wires, new jumpers to connect them into 48-volt banks, and then new cables to run them to the new battery switch and everything else. So, time to crawl out of here and get the crimpers. Yeah. I've got most of the batteries wired up. It's like 10 o'clock at night or something like that. I'm wiring in or bolting in the last positive lead that goes to the main fuse, which is over here. It's not a whole lot of space to work down here, so I have to perform like battery surgery. I'm also wearing rubber gloves because this is our steering cable and it's grounded. And this is the last battery terminal, so I've got 48 volts running through here. It's not enough, it doesn't really hurt, but like if I accidentally touch this, it pinches a little bit. It's not bad, but rubber gloves like this means that it won't do that at all. So it just saves me a little bit of hassle. But I've got a bit of a system down to squeeze these giant cables onto this little lug. There's hardly any space to work, but I'm doing my best. I actually feel like I'm performing surgery. I got gloves on, I've got forceps. Gotta hold the nut just perfect so that I can thread this on ever so carefully, and then I go like 1/8 of a turn at a time. It's kind of like playing that game Operation from when you were a kid, because I don't want to touch the wrench on the steering cable because it might short out the battery. I'm not sure if it will or not, but it's something definitely to avoid. You just crank down on them as hard as you can without breaking anything. Now that they're done, I spray them with a little bit of Corrosion X. That should keep the connection really clean from now and forever. Cool, now I have to finish wiring the main fuse, and then a wire from the main fuse to the main switch, and then over to the motor, and then I'll probably be done for the night. It's gonna be midnight. But they only have one set of crimpers here, so I can only use them after hours for the big cables. I have crimpers for the small cables, but these big 4-aught cables, I need the giant crimpers. I get to use them from 5 p.m. until 5 a.m. Good times. Not much space in here. It's like performing surgery from inside the patient. I'm also taking this opportunity to clean up all the wiring and install it in some of this conduit track, so that when it's all said and done, it's all going to be nicely cleaned up. One of the things that we're installing is a new inverter. We've had this inverter for the last 2 years, this little 300-watt inverter from like Napa or something like that. And surprisingly, it's worked. We've actually run grinders and power tools off of it, and it hasn't melted yet. but we're installing a new 1200 watt inverter. We're also going to be putting a new shore charger behind us so that we can plug into a dock, charge up our new batteries really quick, like a couple, maybe 8 to 10 hours, charge up overnight, and then be able to motor again the next morning. It's something we haven't had yet. We haven't been able to plug into a dock to charge our batteries. We've only relied on solar power to keep our batteries charged up. And we'll continue for the most part to use our solar. We haven't really had an issue keeping our batteries topped off. It's just a matter of if we're gonna be motoring in and out, motor into a marina or something, be able to plug in for the night, charge up, and then motor out the next day if we're gonna ever need to do extended motoring like in canals or anything like that. So that's gonna go behind me. Inverter's gonna go behind me. A new DC to DC converter that's gonna take 48 volts from our battery bank and bring it down to 12 volts is gonna go behind me. All of these wires also lead up and out into the galley where our main DC breaker panel is, and we'll also be installing a new AC breaker panel. Since we have a bigger inverter, we're gonna have more capability to have AC loads like power tools and freezer and stuff like that, and laptops, so that's going to be run off of its own panel. And I removed the old battery switch too. These battery switches aren't rated for the loads that we'll be putting on with our electric motor. Again, we took most of these electronics out of boats that were being demolished, so we kind of just grabbed whatever we could find, and it's technically worked, but there's been a lot of areas that could definitely use some improvement. The new battery switch is going to be mounted on the other side. It's also going to have our solar charger we're moving to the other side because it's been interfering with our VHF radio, and when the solar's charging and the VHF is on, there's a lot of static and feedback. And so we're moving it to the other side of the boat. Hopefully that'll make a difference. Along with a new bilge pump and other breakers for the windlass and the inverter and stuff like that. What else is new back here? We got a new battery monitor, shunts down here. And yeah, now it's just time to get this stuff installed. It's gonna fit nicely right here where our old inverter used to go. And yeah, just have to figure out how to get a drill all the way through there. It's tiny compared to their other Victron controllers. There's a lot of them sitting in the office there. Huge. This one's only 1200 watts, so it'll charge at about 25 amps, which is fine. It's more than enough to charge up our battery bank overnight. Looks like these little black plastic spacers here come out, which makes marking the holes and drilling them a little bit easier. That'll about do it. Battery charger's mounted there. Mounted the inverter over on the corner. And now it's just time to wire them up and then clean up this rat's nest. Alright, as you guys know, for the last 3 years we've been running our boat off of 4 Group 27D 100 amp hour lead acid batteries. At the beginning it was all we could afford, and as we traveled and as we used our electric motor and as we killed our batteries, we had to replace them, and again, each time we replaced them, the only thing we could afford was lead acid, and it was the only thing available to us in the Caribbean. We knew that when we made it back to the US, we would be replacing with lithium, so it was always sort of a struggle to validate buying more lead acid, but we had to keep going. And lead acid batteries in general just aren't designed to handle the loads of an electric motor. If you have a whole bunch of them, they could kind of do it. Golf carts have lead acid batteries in them, but for what we have, what we need, lithium was really the only viable option. So now we have Battleborn batteries. They're made by a company called Dragonfly Energy right here in the United States. They're actually assembled in Reno, and we have 12 of them. They're drop-in replacements for the Group 27s that we had. They're 100 amp hour batteries, and they're the same size, but they're about a third of the weight. So installing them was so much easier, and having 12 of them on board isn't that much more weight than the 4 we originally had. Let's have a quick chat about lithium-ion batteries. There's a lot of confusion out there. There's a lot of information and there's a lot of misinformation. There's a lot of different chemistries that fall under lithium. The ones we have are lithium iron phosphate. They tend to be a more stable system, but they're a little bit less energy dense. But on a sailboat, that doesn't really matter. And something like an airplane or a cell phone, where size and weight is important, that matters. But for us, having something that's more stable is much more important than having something that has 5% more energy in it or something like that. Lithium basically breaks down into two types. There's prismatic, which are little pouches like the ones in the back of your smartphone. And then there's the ones we have, which are cylindrical. They look basically like flashlight batteries, like AA batteries. That's a cylindrical battery. They're the same ones that they use in like the Tesla cars, the Tesla Powerwall. And they just tend to be a very stable, very reliable lithium source. So inside each one of our batteries, each 12-volt battery, there's a whole bunch of those little lithium cells all wired together in parallel and series, giving you the 100 amp hours at 12 volts. And you can actually lose individual cells in there and it will bring the capacity down, but the voltage should stay the same. So they're not indestructible, but it takes a lot to kill one of them. All of those individual cells are managed by a pretty basic circuit board that looks kind of like this. And it basically controls the charge voltage and how much draw you can pull out of the battery, so each cell stays balanced inside of each pack. With prismatic cells, a lot of times you have to have an external battery management system that controls all of that, but these batteries, they're sealed and that little circuit board is inside of each battery, so they wire up and run very similar to a lead acid. They're super easy to install. Each one of the batteries we have now is 12 volts and 100 amp hours. So we have 12 of them. So 12 volts times 100 amp hours times 12 batteries gives us a total of about 14 kilowatts of working energy, which is really nice. Looking at it, and at first glance, it kind of looks like about 3 times more power than we had before, because we had 4 100 amp hour batteries and now we have 12 100 amp hour batteries, but it's actually a lot more than that, which is why lithium's so great for our application. All right, I'll try not to go into too much detail, but it basically boils down to this. There's something with batteries called C rating. The basics of a battery is that a 100 amp hour battery, if you pull 1 amp out at a time, you can pull that 1 amp load for 100 hours. But with a lead acid battery, most of them have a low C rating of like 0.2 or 0.25, which means the higher the amperage you pull out, the less usable capacity you have. It's kind of like an inverse ratio thing. So for ours, we had 4 100 amp batteries wired in series to make 48 volts, which means we had basically one big 48 volt battery rated at 100 amp hours. Now they say you're only supposed to discharge lead acid to 50%, which means we only had about 50 amps. So if we had a 1 amp draw, we could run it for 50 hours. But with our motor, if we were motoring at maybe 4 to 5 knots, we'd be drawing about 50 amps. And that doesn't mean we'd be able to draw that 50 amps for a full hour. In reality, it was more like 10 or 15 minutes before our batteries were completely dead. So here's where the difference comes in. With lithium, the C rating is a lot higher. We have 100 amp hour batteries. They're wired, we have 12 of them, and they're wired into 3 banks, creating 3 large 48 volt batteries, if that makes sense. Each one is rated at 100 amps. We can take 1 amp out at a time, or we can take all 100 amps out at a time. We still get that 100 amps. You can also discharge lithium down to maybe 20% or so you can use more of the power that you have. But also if you're drawing larger loads like we are with the electric motor, you actually get more of that power as well. So what looks like only 3 times more capacity at first glance really boils down to almost 20 times more capacity if you do the math and you include the C ratings. Because before, we could only motor for about 15 minutes because when we drew 50 amps, we'd get less power out of our batteries than if we were drawing, say, 1 amp. Now, we have a 300 amp hour battery bank and we can use about 250 of those amps at 48 volts, which means we can motor drawing 50 amps, which gives us about 4 to 5 knots of speed, we can motor for about 5 hours. So the difference between 15 minutes of motoring and 5 hours of motoring is huge. It's almost 20 times more. So now that the lithium's actually installed, we have a little bit more wiring to do, and then we'll be able to get out and do some actual testing out on the ICW and here at the dock, and hopefully confirm this math in real world testing. We may even start looking into other higher power draws like an induction cooktop and a water maker and things like that. Now that we have that extra capacity, not only does it mean we can draw more out of our batteries, but it also means that they'll probably charge quite a bit quicker as well, because they can absorb more power from our solar than our old lead acid batteries could. We can't wait to get out there and give our new batteries a test and see just how much better they are. And of course, we're going to capture and share all of that with you guys right here on our YouTube channel. So don't forget to subscribe, and we'll see you next week. Cheers.